morning. It's December 23rd. I'm Jim Hennager. This is Table Talk for the New Independent Party. Very unusual weather. It's raining outside, and you may be able to hear it on the roof. And you may be able to hear some dripping from some places where it's still coming in. I can't find it. I was up on the roof the other day and doing some patching, and I can't find where the water is coming in and how to stop it. So I may need to get some experts to help me. I built the four-season porch myself, and it has a plastic roof, and where it connects to the house, it has shifted, so it has to be something related to that. But anyway, in the last few sessions, I've talked about looking to possible solutions to some of the problems that we have in our country and really around the world. And many countries have almost identical problems that we're having here in the political, social, economic arenas. So I'm not just speaking to Americans here. I'm hoping to share some ideas with countries around the world. But I've suggested that what we need is some very large projects, macro projects that would hire upwards to 1 billion people, provide accommodations, housing, jobs, food, recreation, water, health care for upwards to 5 billion people by 2050. And I believe that that's possible with development of an international mass transit system, a tube system underneath the interstate systems, pretty much a 60-foot wide hole made by lasers, and 4 lanes of traffic in there so that some can go up to 200 miles an hour. A couple tubes at the top of the bigger tube that pneumatic or electromagnetic or induction technologies would allow capsules to go up to 600 miles, and then below the floor bed would be tubes for natural gas, for petroleum products, and fresh water and ocean water. And by distributing those liquids around the world, we'd get more of an equitable kind of sharing of those resources by having people being able to move very efficiently at very low cost. I'm hoping that it would be pennies a mile, that we would be able to see a sharing of people, products, and also ideas, and hopefully develop what I would like to see develop as an international civilization. Now, that civilization does not have to be identical. I think it could be very diverse, and we just have to come to respect people for their differences. But at the heart of it, I believe people here on earth are more alike than different, and we should be able to get along. So having this mass transit system is a way to bring us together. Wherever there's an exit or an entry, I would see the opportunity for what I would call peace village or community, a city to develop there. And that's where we are able to provide new communities, maybe 25,000 or more of these new communities around the globe. Each community starting small and growing to maybe 200,000 people. That gives us the 5 billion. Okay, so I hope you kind of see the structure that I'm suggesting. Yesterday I got into the need for international development of strategies on space with a university system around the world that concentrates on developing new technologies, new space technologies, another one for oceans and waters, and another one for Earth, so that we get to know more about our Earth, which I think is very vital to our future. And maybe we should be doing these things even before we go and colonize, the moon or Mars. But in any case, this gives us opportunities. I would recommend that these new national and international universities be located along the interstate system. Okay, so you can see that it kind of go hand in glove here. Now today I'd like to get into the need for what I would call a reform restructuring of our government. And what I saw this last weekend when Congress voted to, and the President passed the short-term budget, about $1.5 trillion of discretionary funds, I was hoping that they would show some responsibility and show us that they're willing to bring the budget down so that we have, the hope at least of a balanced budget someday. But they went the opposite direction. There was all kinds of earmarks and special funding in there for special interest groups. So I believe that the voters of America need to be honest and recognize that the people in Congress, the ones that have been voted there, are not being responsible. They're not willing to make the tough decisions to come to a balanced budget, and that would seem paramount to stabilizing a government into the future. And it leaves our grandchildren with such a debt that it's just not acceptable. Okay, so what can we do? I say we fire them. If these people were on the board of directors or the management of any corporation and they were running a company, even a nonprofit school or organization like what our Congress people are running our country, somebody'd have to fire them. And I think that responsibility comes to the voter. So this next time, 2016, is our first opportunity. We need to give them all pink slips. They all need to be fired. We need to replace them with new elected people, and that's why we're bringing forward the new independent party. And hopefully we can put people in there that will take that responsibility. Now, it's not an easy task to go from a budget of $3.5 trillion and reduce it down to a balanced budget. Nobody's saying it is. For years I've had my students take the federal budget and go right down the list of where they would want cuts to be made, and it's a very difficult decision. So what I'm saying is we need to move in this direction. Okay. Now, to do that, I think some things need to change in how we do government on the federal level and also on the state levels. And one of the things would be to restructure and bring in some reform on how we spend our money. For one, I highly recommend that we go to a zero-based budgeting where every department has to start from zero every year and build up a budget to what they need, not just because of what they had last year or what amount they're rolling over from excess last year into the future. It should start from zero every time, and they have to state exactly what they need the money for in each budget year. And in doing that, we should be able to find out exactly what is needed. Now, what's happening with the U.S. budget makes it very concerning. Since 9/11, we're allowing certain departments to basically take money from other departments without anybody knowing it. I don't know if you're aware of that. But for example, the intelligence groups can take money from other departments and soak in the military. I don't like that. That's not a good way to run a government or a business. And I think you have to stay within budget. And you can't have secret budgets and have secret organizations that are getting funded on contract outside of the government. That's where things are getting crazy, and we're losing control of who's doing what and why they're doing it and who's paying for it. So I think we have to establish some accounting rules here. We need to use approved government accounting, and I think it needs to be accrual accounting so that it's 1 year and we know what was spent in a year, and we take care of it by acknowledging it into the next year as well. But That would be just one thing. It's a huge. I think we need to audit every department, and I think we need to be able to audit things like the Federal Reserve, and we need a deep audit in large banks. Anybody that has an effect on our economy, that receives money from us, I think they need to have deep audits. A deep audit is one that goes clear into what's happening, so that certain kinds of actions can't be hidden from the public. And I think if we had deep audit of the Federal Reserve and the banks, it would tell us some ways that we're going to have to improve things in the future, and I'll get to that in a few minutes. So I think we have to do some things on a financial accountability side to balance the budget and show that we have the discipline to do that. But not just for our country. I don't see how people in the rest of the world can take seriously the United States if we're not willing to do the very same things that we're suggesting other countries do. Through the World Bank or through the International IMF, we're suggesting countries balance their budgets and be financially responsible. We need to do it as a leader, and we need to do it even for our own people. I mean, how can people understand that they have to, balance their checkbook and keep, money in the bank to pay for things if our own government doesn't do it? Okay, it just makes sense. I mean, we're not trying to be hard on anybody here, but we need to be rational about this, and that's the only thing that can come out of this, is that we need to move in that direction. Now, I would recommend that in addition to restructuring, what we do is start off with a lowering of the budgets. And I would say that even if a new independent party could come in with a majority of the House and a large number of senators, it's going to take 2 terms at least before we can have enough people elected to start making some serious changes. However, I think if we can have a president elected in 2016, one of the first things this person should do is declare that we're going to move to a balanced budget, and do that by across-the-board cuts in all departments, 1% per month. Okay, so the first month this person is in office, we go across the board and we reduce all the budgets by 1%. The second month is another percent. The third month is another percent. You following me? It's the only fair way to do it. Everybody has to take a reduction. It means that people have to be let go. Programs have to be evaluated. Some programs that aren't doing anything, that aren't producing any kind of positive result, they need to be cut. Okay, so that within the departments you would see a 1% per month cut until we got to the expected revenues equal to the gross national product. Now, typically we've seen the revenues coming in at about 17-18% of gross national product. We would like to target it at 18%, and I'll tell you how we can increase the revenues here in a minute. But if we can target it at 18% as revenues, then we need to target the expenditure side at 15%. So we're going to bring the budget down, which now is over 20% of gross national product. We need to bring it down pretty much 5% to 15%, and that's going to take a number of months, to bring that from the 20% level down to the 15% level of gross national product. Okay, it's going to be some tough decisions, and a lot of people are going to be upset. Okay, but I think you're going to have to do that to get down to that. Now, on the revenue side, I think we need to make some changes. I think we have a really screwed up tax system. I don't know how anybody could argue that it's not. And so we need to simplify it. And instead of millions and millions of pages of tax code, I would recommend that we go to, on the individual side, it's a straight 15% for everybody. No matter what your income is, or how small it is or how large it is, everybody contributes 15% of their income. That goes for capital gains. It goes for inherited funds. Okay, any kind of asset that comes in, you get charged 15%. So on the individual side, there's no exceptions and no deductions. Okay, so we don't have all of this, taking your house interest off and all of those kind of things. It's straight. And to do that, I think we're going to have to require that everybody have a bank account. Now, over 40 million people today don't have a bank account because banks have dismissed them. Okay? So we're going to have to change how the banking system works, but everybody has to have a bank account. Every income that comes in would automatically have a 15% deduction. And whenever the income came in, there would be a deduction for the federal government going out. Okay? On the corporate side, I think it also should be 15%, but instead of profits, which is a crazy animal to tax. I mean, it's so complicated how companies figure their profitability. I think it needs to move to revenue. So on the corporate level, I think 15% of all their revenues, gross revenues, needs to be taxed. And again, it needs to go through a bank and it needs to be visible. It has to be transparent, and it should be 15% of revenues. Now, that's a drastic change from what we have today. We actually have Fortune 100 companies that aren't paying any taxes. They have 3 floors of their skyscraper filled with tax specialist attorneys just to figure out ways to get over, and not have to pay any taxes. That's not fair. Everybody pays, no deductions, no exemptions, and no special rules. I understand that there's a company that is a foreign-owned, but it does these tours in the Caribbean. They land at 5 different ports, but somehow they got into a special interest deal on a legislation that says they don't have to pay any taxes. None of that. Everybody pays their fair share. Even if you make 10,000, and now we actually give these people money back. It doesn't make any sense to give money back on refunds if they haven't paid it in. Okay, so everybody pays 15%. Now, theoretically, that should work out if gross national product is based on economic activity, then 15% of your income should come to that portion of gross national product. On the company side, it should be actually more fair, because profits does not reflect gross national product wise, but revenues do. So it's, I think, a very fair system, and it would simplify everything. I mean, you wouldn't even have to fill out a tax form, because it would automatically go through your account and come out of your account on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, whatever you get paid or whatever your revenue is coming into your company. Okay? So that implies, that we have to have a bank account for everybody. Every company has to have a bank account. It implies that everybody has to have an identity card or an identity related to that bank account. And I think it'll work out. I mean, we should be able to, if we can hold the federal government to 15% budget of the gross national product, then our revenue should equal that as well. Now, what I'm saying is that we have 18% revenue and 15% expenditures. That difference of 3% has to go to paying off this debt, because right now we're still adding to it. It doesn't make any sense. So what I'm suggesting there is, I think the interest on the national debt now is between $350 and $400 billion a year. And that's going to, special interest groups. It's going back to the banks. It's going back to large investors on these bonds. I'm recommending that that what we have the U.S. Treasury do is issue what is called a silver certificate and basically pay off the $18 trillion in national debt immediately. How can they do that? Well, what we're doing is substituting one paper debt for another one. But one debt, the one that's out there now, has interest on it. The silver certificate by the U.S. Treasury would not have any interest. That would save us $300 or $400 billion every year right away. And it would, at least theoretically, pay off all of the bonds and indebtedness we have to people around the world. So the Chinese would get $1.5 trillion in these paper instruments. All the other countries that have invested in our debt would have that piece of paper. Now, if we could make a promise that 3% of the difference between a 15 and 18% on our national gross national product was going to go, so that 3% was going to go to pay down the debt. Basically, they're going to be assured that their paper is worth something over the next 10, 15 years. Okay, are you following the logic here? It's a very legal kind of move. It's one that's been proposed a number of times in Congress, but special interest groups, particularly the large banks and the Federal Reserve, don't like it because it shuts them out. Now, I think we have to ask a deep audit of maybe the top 25 banks in the country, and they need to have transparency on whether or not their assets are better than their liabilities. I'm of the opinion, and I'm not alone on this, that particularly the largest banks, they're technically bankrupt. They have far more hidden liabilities and derivatives and other kinds of paper that they've issued, and they can't cover it. So if we find that the large banks are insolvent, in my opinion and the New Independent Party, our opinion is that we need to come forward with legislation that requires them to be dissolved. Okay? Now we hear this all the time that banks are too big to go down, and that's not true. If they're not solvent, if they're not managing themselves in a way that can guarantee they're being solvent, then they need to be divested. Now, what's happened since 2008 is the top five banks have actually bought out the next largest 100, and they've bought those out basically with economic easing money from the Federal Reserve. These top five banks actually own the Federal Reserve, and that's the problem. That's why our economy is going up and down. And there's all kinds of problems with that. Okay, we also think the Federal Reserve needs to be audited. We do not believe it is solvent. I don't see how it could be, to be honest. And we think the Federal Reserve needs to be dissolved. Okay. Its assets need to be distributed, but its administrative kind of functions need to be taken over by the U.S. Treasury Department in a new banking system, a national banking system that would basically bring together what we're moving for are 6 regional centers here in the United States for all government, but we'd have 6 regional banks, national banks, and those people would be elected and appointed by some fair means. The chairman of that central banking system would be appointed by the president and approved by the Senate, just like it is now. But the central banking would not be owned by any bank. Okay, that separation is only logical, and I don't know why we ever got ourselves into 1913 into creating the Federal Reserve and this whole set of problems. Okay, I know that's controversial. It could be even dangerous to bring that idea up, but that's the direction we're moving. We have to stabilize our banks. We have to stabilize our economy, and by doing this, we have a national system of banks where all of the tax revenue goes into continually. The Social Security, the Medicare, all those payments go into these national banks, regional banks, and then they go and being distributed. Okay, so that's the basic idea of how we can balance the budget, how we can have reliable budgets, and how we can stabilize the economy, the banking system, so that in the future we can see an economy that stays like this rather than goes like this. And one of the rules that I think we have to put in here is that you cannot sell short. Okay, no more of this gambling house, roulette wheel kind of banking system that we have today. So by stabilizing it, I would think the federal level of interest on these national banks might stay at 3%, and the prime rate would be at 3%, and banks then would be able to make money by having interest rates in the savings accounts again at 4 to 6%. And I would say that excess money in the national system, and I'm recommending that for the state system as well, like North Dakota has gone to this system, And they've come out very well in the last decade, and have all the revenues go into a state bank, and then what we're arguing is to have all the federal revenues go into these regional banks, national banks, and the excess money then is used for economic development. Instead of investing them in stocks and bonds, which can go crazy on you, we would think that the excess money could be used for economic development, and loans go out at 8% or 10% or 12% depending on the risk levels, but we would always have that base of money flowing in and out. And at the state level, that can be a considerable amount of money going into new businesses, expanding businesses, and we really feel that that's necessary to build up our economy from the middle, particularly the middle class, by creating jobs, by creating companies. You can't do it artificially by saying, well, we're going to pay everybody $15 minimum wage, because you're just squeezing the balloon and it's going to pop up on you on the other end, and people are going to get laid off. We don't want that. What we want to have are employee-owned companies, and we need to have a source of money, source of credit revolving, which is not happening today, on both the national and state levels. Okay, so if we can establish that as a base, then what we'd like to see is taking out the central control of the U.S. government in Washington, D.C. and distribute it out into 6 regions. Now, this might actually have to happen because of some other factors. Again, it comes back to this global warming. If the weather we're having here today is because of global warming. There's no other way that we can suggest it. And I think the scientists, the weather people are being careful not to panic people, but it would look like we could see the ice in Antarctica, Iceland, and Greenland almost disappear in the next decade, maybe within the next few years, and that's going to raise the oceans by a lot more than they're predicting. Some people are saying it might be 2 or 3 meters. In my opinion, and a lot of other people, we're looking at 50, 70, 100-foot rise in the ocean levels, and maybe 100 foot or more, okay, in the next decade or more. It's not a century kind of deal. I think we're going to see this develop very rapidly, which means all the coastal cities, from New York to Washington, D.C., Boston, Philadelphia, Miami, New Orleans, Houston, San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Portland, and Seattle, but also Chicago, Buffalo, Detroit, Toronto, any city on a large body of sea like the Great Lakes, that's going to come up too. That's connected to the oceans, so you're going to see that come up. But you're going to see some changes in geography. Some people are predicting that the Gulf of Mexico will come all the way up to St. Louis, and a third to 2/3 of Florida will disappear. The coastline will disappear. So what we're suggesting is these 6 regional centers, the 4 outside ones would be on the inside of the Rocky Mountains on the west coast and inside the Appalachian Mountains on the east coast, and then 2 in the middle that hopefully won't have to run from the waters coming up. And I would suggest that of the 6, 1 regional center become the new capital of the United States, and that it be at the junction of Interstate 35 and 80, which is Des Moines, Iowa, just 28 miles down the road from here, but it's the most logical place for a new capital. And I think it would add to our national security tremendously to have 6 regional federal centers and a capital that is inland, not on the coast. There's just too many scenarios where you could have a terrorist attack and create a tsunami off of the coast and just wipe out, huge numbers of cities without much, way to defend it. But I think it's also a defense against some of the natural catastrophes that we're looking at. Okay, so we're suggesting that we bring the government into 6 regional centers, a capital in Des Moines, all along the interstates. Okay, again, we're following along with that development. the interstate transportation system underneath would go from coast to coast and up and down and then around the world. Okay, so we're seeing all of that as possibly getting developed, getting started in the next decade. Certainly it's going to take 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 administrations to move it in this direction. And so it can't be back and forth, Republicans, Democrats. It's got to be a new party. It's got to be a new independent party, and people have to support it, not for 2 years or 4 years, but for maybe thousands of years. Okay, we're not looking at a party that's going to come and go. Okay, this has to be something that people come to in all 240 countries, and we have to have some commonalities, some consistency over long periods of time. What's happening in our government is swinging back and forth and having the kind of division that we have in politics, the deadlock, that's really stupid politics. Okay, we can do better than that, and that's what we're suggesting by having a restructuring, reform within our government. We can do this, and it's fair to everybody. Okay, now that brings up another point, and I'm a little hesitant to get to this because I don't have a feeling that I know enough about this phenomena to say one way or the other. But all you have to do is look on YouTube, and there's literally hundreds and hundreds of videos now on this phenomena called the X planet. The idea that there's some large body coming in an orbit that's going to come very close to Earth, and it could be very soon. Some are predicting that the first pass by of this X planet, which is 4 times larger than Earth, could come within 1 million miles or so as early as March or April of 2016, and we're not hearing about it. A student asked me about it last semester. I had heard about it, but I thought it was just fable kind of talk. But the more I look at it, I'm afraid that there might be something to this. And the implication is that NASA and other agencies, space agencies, started picking up on this in the 1950s and 60s, that this object was in a weird orbit that doesn't follow the other 9 planets. It goes crossways to them and goes way out, and it takes 16,000 years or so and comes back. And when it comes back through, it goes back and comes around the sun in a short orbit and then comes out at tremendous speed. It's like a slingshot. And traveling at tremendous speeds, if it even crosses our path, our orbit, within 1 million miles or so, it's going to create tremendous gravitational pull. And that's very, very concerning, because it would suggest, just like our moon produces tidal waves, very consistently, if you had this object coming through, it would create tremendous tidal waves, but also tsunamis. The ocean would just pick up and come onto the land. And I've seen some maps now being generated by the U.S. government, it appears, that would indicate that everything east of the Appalachian and west of the Rocky Mountains could be lost. And on the Gulf side, you're talking about water coming all the way up to the Great Lakes. So it would be a tremendous, devastating catastrophe. And apparently it has happened on Earth repeatedly. It's come close enough in the past that it's maybe created, the biblical Great Flood. It's probably created some ice ages, because right behind this large planet, or whatever you want to call it, there's a debris field that stretches for hundreds of thousands of miles. So even though you would be able to survive the first pass and the tidal waves, the tsunamis, the earth, which would produce earthquakes and giant volcanoes all over the earth, if you could survive all of that, you have this debris field that would shoot millions and millions of meteors onto Earth for months. So you have a few days where you have to survive the first pass, and then you have months to survive meteor shower that would just be like you were in an artillery war, much worse than that. So the probability of survival, if this is true, is very low, okay? And it disturbs me that our government isn't talking about this. Now maybe it goes back to that same study in the 60s where they're saying, the public can't handle this. There are going to be widespread rioting and destructions, and we don't want that. But instead, what it appears they've done is build 600 FEMA camps. Check me out. You can find it on the internet. They're all over the United States. They're basically detention centers that if martial law is called, that people that are dissenting or creating havoc can be put in these detention centers. And now I'm picking up that there's also been a concerted effort by a very small number of people that they have built underground cities, over 100 in the Washington, D.C. area and another hundreds across the United States. I'm reading that truck drivers are saying they're going into tunnels and they travel under the Appalachian Mountains 800 miles from Washington, D.C. up into northern Maine, and there's these underground cities all along there. They can drive from Washington, D.C. to Denver, and from Denver to Colorado Springs, clear up to Cheyenne, Montana, in basically a secret society. And the people that are going to be allowed into these underground cities and protected areas are the richest people, the most elite people, the military people, the people elected to Congress. And what we're being told is they've paid for this over the last 40 years or so by excess budgets. For a long time I was wondering, why would anybody continue to have budgets that don't balance? And how are we ever going to pay it off? But if they've been secretly taking this money and by the trillions, using it to build this underground secret society to survive this catastrophe, that's not acceptable. As a U.S. citizen, as a person of the people, I'm saying that's not acceptable. In my opinion, and I'm sure it would be of anybody that doesn't have a ticket to go into an underground chamber, it's not acceptable. This is high treason. We either plan for a catastrophe for all of us to survive, or we plan for that we don't survive, all of us. Okay? I'm sorry to bring that up. I don't mean to suggest that you have to panic, but I suggest you do some looking into this. There's a lot of stuff on YouTube, there's a lot of literature on the internet, and I think we should start demanding from our elected officials to know the truth. We need to know what is coming, and I think we have that right as U.S. citizens, but we also have that right as a citizen of the world, because what we're reading are things like there's 5,000 of these underground chambers being built in Russia and China and India. People of the world, you need to find out what's going on. Okay? I'm sorry to end it that way today, but I'm just trying to suggest that we have to move in new directions. Okay? Thank you.